The train station was packed and crowded. People were bustling in all sorts of different directions. Nonetheless, I was able to get through the throng of people and carry my baggage all at the same time. A few moments later, I saw my train and headed over. Surprisingly, I was still able to make it to my ride on time. Now that is luck all on its own, I thought. I'm glad that I made it on time. I guess that would be considered impressive for someone like me. Yeah, someone who's always late. I inhaled deeply as I kept walking. Just keep it together, Felicity, the voices in my head were saying. Just keep it together. Right then, the feeling of someone's hand on my shoulder snapped me back into reality. I looked up to see a dark-skinned man staring at me. "May I help you with your bags, miss?" he asked me. I nodded. With that, he grabbed hold of my luggage and began loading it onto the train. Before I walked away, I glanced at the man one more time. "Thanks," I say, smiling. The man smiled back at me in return. "You're welcome, miss," he replied. I then walked away and got on the train, but when I did, I accidentally bumped into a boy who stood nearby and let out a small gasp when I did. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, and instantly felt my face going red with embarrassment. "It's okay," the boy replied. Once we've both recovered, I glanced up at the boy I just bumped into so that I could get a proper look at him. The boy looked like he was about my age, or a few years older, and he was dressed in jeans, a black sweater, a light brown scarf, a pair of nice shoes, and a green hat. Sticking out of the hat, I noticed, were curls of black hair. I also couldn't help but notice how attractive this guy was, because if I must admit, he was quite handsome, with a narrow face, pale complexion, high cheekbones, a flat chin, and a defined square jawline, complete with lips that looked as though their touch would be soft, and light gray eyes with little flecks of blue within them. As I continued to stare at him, I was pulled back into reality once again, when I realized I'd been glaring at him longer than I should. With that, I stopped what I'm doing immediately and tore my gaze away from him. "What are you, a creep? This isn't like you." However, to my surprise, I noticed that he didn't turn away right after our little exchange like most people probably would have by now. He was still staring straight at me. Just then, a smile formed on his lips and his cheeks flushed red. Neither of us said anything to each other during those few awkward moments, but suddenly, the boy broke the silence between us by saying, "It's okay that you bumped into me. You didn't exactly hurt me in any way or anything, but I thought I should let you know that." Relieved, I smiled back at him. "Oh, okay," I say, my voice coming out slightly strained when I spoke again. Silence. Then he extended his hand out to me, chuckling slightly. "Hi, I believe I haven't introduced myself properly. I'm Jonathan. And you are?" For some reason, though, before I could speak, my breath gets caught in my throat, and I hesitated. Along with that, a wave of nervousness began flooding through me as my hands started to get clammy and a tendril of sweat rolled down my back. "Oh no, not again," I thought. "You are not going to have another panic attack. You are not." Despite all the time I've spent working through my anxiety issues recently, clearly those efforts are unfortunately failing on me once again. Why in Christ's sake is this happening now when I've been doing so good on my progress? What if this stranger thinks I'm a creep, or worse, what if he assumes I want to get inside his pants? How awkward do I seem right now? Accompanied by the nerves, anger began to rise in my chest as well. "Just calm down, Felicity. All you have to do is say your name and introduce yourself." There's no need to overthink this. Don't be shy. Finally, after what must have looked like several moments of me standing there looking like an idiot, I found the courage to use my voice and spoke again. Felicity, my name is Felicity, I said. I then shook his hand. The boy, Jonathan, continued to smile at me, and when he did, I noticed that he no longer appeared awkward and instead held himself with confidence, which made me envy him secretly. That's something I could never do. Felicity. That's a nice name for a girl like yourself, he replied. His compliment was enough to make my cheeks flush red. Here I was, standing in front of the most beautiful boy I've ever seen, making a fool of myself. Why was he having this sort of effect on me? Even with my social anxiety, I still have moments where I can keep it under control, but this was a major letdown. After a few moments, I found my voice and spoke again. It was nice meeting you, Jonathan. It was nice meeting you too, Felicity, he replied, which made my cheeks flush red again. Damn it. Get a grip on yourself. I've been standing here for far too long, I thought. I should probably go and sit down at my own seat. Besides, the train would be moving soon. With that, I ended the awkward conversation between us. I think I'd better go. Oh, okay, he says. It was nice talking to you, Felicity. You too, Jonathan, I replied. Without another word, I turned away from Jonathan and began walking towards my seat. I sat down, feeling dazed. Why had I acted like that? So strangely. So awkwardly, especially in front of him. My social anxiety was probably just playing tricks on me. Just as I was about to shrug off the thought out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that Jonathan was staring at me again, only this time it was from where he sat on his seat on the train. And he wouldn't look away. He just kept staring at me, and as he did, his cheeks flushed red again. It's obvious that he's into me now. I could tell. I could just tell. However, when he caught sight of me noticing him, he immediately turned away. Yup, he definitely likes me, I thought. As I continued to sit in my seat, I shrugged off the thought and instead focused ahead of me. The train began to move shortly afterward, and throughout the duration of the ride, I spent it by trying to keep my thoughts in order. 2 hours later, the train came to a sudden halt, signaling that the ride was over. Relieved, I stood up and began heading over towards the exit doors. Once I did, my sole focus of the moment was to get off the train and head to my hotel. I was going to forget about Jonathan. This whole thing was stupid, really, and keeping him at the forefront of my mind was unnecessary to me when I barely knew him. Our interaction shouldn't mean anything to me, because he was just a stranger to me, as I'm pretty sure I was to him. Why was I suddenly caring for it and thinking about a stranger I barely knew? Nothing about our brief conversation was special. He was attractive, yes, but that was it. I'd probably never see him again anyway, so forgetting about him was better. As I continued making my way over to my hotel, I came to my decision, and I was going to stick with it. A few days later. No matter how hard I tried, forgetting about Jonathan seemed almost impossible. I couldn't get him off my mind. I was constantly thinking about him. Strangely, he was the first thing I thought about when I woke up, and the last thing I thought about when I went to bed. Which was crazy. I shouldn't even be thinking about him, but I was, and I couldn't stop, no matter how hard I tried. I arrived at the train station in no time flat. Once again, I managed to get through the throng of people and still got to my train on time. I'm just having amazing luck then, I thought. Moments later, my baggage was loaded onto the train, and I made my way aboard. As I'm about to sit down, though, I was met with irony. Jonathan was sitting in the seat that was next to mine. At this, I almost wanted to facepalm at the irony of the situation, because here he was again when he'd been on my mind for the past few days. Suddenly, he then glanced up at me and smiled. "Oh, hi, Felicity," he says. "I didn't know you'd be sitting here." I chuckled. "Well, I am," I replied. "Hope you don't mind that." Without another word, I sat down. A few moments later, Jonathan spoke and said something I wasn't expecting. "Felicity, I have something to tell you," he says. Hearing him say that almost made me want to laugh again, but harder this time. Even though I didn't know what he had to tell me, I couldn't help but find humor in the situation. Was my life suddenly turning into a rom-com where the love interest says something they need to tell the person they're in love with when they see them again? Because that's kind of what this feels like. "This may sound crazy, but I've been thinking about you a lot over the past few days," he says. This was enough to make my heart race inside my chest. What the fuck? Was this honestly just some type of coincidence that he just so happens to have been thinking about me a lot too? Was my life one big coincidence now? There better be a good explanation for what's been going on then, if this was a coincidence. However, to my surprise, once Jonathan finished his part, I found my voice rather quickly, and before I even had a chance to fully process what he just told me, my truth came spilling out of me. "I have too." At that moment, his eyes widened. "Really?" he replied, astonished. I nodded. Jonathan stayed silent for a moment, but then spoke again. "Okay, then this next part might sound even crazier." He paused, then said, "Look, I know we only just met a few days ago, but..." He paused again, then continued, "I think I might be in love with you." Now my heart's racing at a rapid rate to the point where I didn't know what to do with myself. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what the hell is happening? This is all too fast. But I somehow liked it. I really liked it. I liked everything we've been talking about, everything that's going on here. Sure enough, my truth came spilling out of me again, and for the first time in several years, I wasn't afraid to be bold and hold back. Somehow, I found myself confessing to Jonathan without worrying what I was saying, how I was saying it, or what type of person this was making me seem like. Confessions were now flying off my tongue, and I couldn't control them. Jonathan, he raised his eyebrows. "I have something to tell you too." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down a bit before I continued. But before I even had a chance to say something else, Jonathan took my hands and held them in his. The look in his eyes was serious. "I know what you're about to say, Felicity. I know," he says. I stared at him and said nothing. All I did was continue to listen. He knew, somehow. He knew how I felt about him, and I didn't even have to say it. Was it possible that he already predicted what I'd been about to say to him? Was this because he started off with the same phrase that I was now using? Probably. But before I can let you continue, I have one more thing to say. I have never met a girl like you before, but I knew from the moment I saw you that you were someone special. At this, I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could interject, he put a finger to my lips, silencing me. I don't want to give you up. He paused, then said, "Strangely, you mean a lot to me, Felicity. You do. And I don't know why, but I'm crazy about you. I can't stop thinking about you." He then leaned forward slightly and whispered, "I think you're beautiful. So fucking beautiful." And the next moment, he's kissing me, and I'm kissing him back. It startled me at first, but at the same time, I welcomed it with open arms. Upon our lips touching, I was met with a firework-like sensation that ran through my body, which was enough to make me forget about my surroundings. I didn't want him to stop. His lips felt soft, warm, comfortable, and his kiss was gentle. When we broke apart for a brief moment, he quickly leaned in again and kissed me a second time. As we're kissing, though, oddly enough, I also felt safe around him, which I knew was supposed to be strange, but to me, it only felt natural. Except I couldn't place a reason as to why, because I didn't have one. It was as if I was having an out-of-body, out-of-mind experience. Why does kissing a stranger have to feel this nice? Why should it feel this nice? Unfortunately, I didn't have an answer to that. But I know that I haven't felt this way about anyone in a long time. I knew that I loved it, though. After spending several wonderful moments kissing, we broke apart again, and Jonathan looked me in the eyes. As I told you, I think I'm falling in love with you, Felicity. Is that weird? I laughed. Yes, it's definitely weird, I replied smoothly. But I'm okay with it, because I'm starting to feel something for you too, something I'm having a hard time explaining. A surprised expression plastered across his face, and his eyes widened. Really? I nodded. Silence arose between us for a few moments, and in that time, Jonathan rested his head on my shoulder and spoke again. With his gaze still on mine, you have such a pretty face, and eyes, and smile, and personality. Is there anything about you that isn't beautiful? Was that a serious question? I replied. He chuckled. Yes, he said. Now answer it. I sat and thought for a moment, and after a few moments, I have the perfect response. Not everything about me is beautiful, Jonathan. I'm not perfect. I have flaws, and so do you, I assume. Does that answer your question? It answers it enough, he replied. I don't know why, but I thought you'd go more in depth than that. I raised an eyebrow. Do you want me to go more in depth than that? I asked. No, he said. I liked your answer. I was just curious to hear what you had to say. Okay. Jonathan didn't say another word, and I didn't either, and with that, silence arose between us again. It stayed like that between us for a majority of the train ride, which I didn't mind at all and found quite nice. Jonathan continued to rest his head on my shoulder, along with one hand on my leg. Keeping our silence, we both stared out the window and watched as the train moved forward. I wouldn't change anything about that moment, or anything that previously happened between us, regardless of our circumstances. I didn't care about any of that. All I wanted, and all that mattered to me, was having Jonathan by my side.